Vietnam, 1966. 881 South. The sound wasn't the rifle's burst. It was the click. Dry, hollow, a death sentence wrapped in black polymer. Sergeant Tom Rivers slammed the forward assist with his palm, praying the round would chamber. It didn't. The bolt was frozen, corroded, jammed with carbon and jungle rot that no cleaning manual had warned them about. 40 meters downhill, NVA rifles cracked through morning mist, AK-47s that never stopped firing, AKs that worked when dropped in rice paddies, buried in mud, pulled from Rivers. Rivers' M16 had fired exactly 19 rounds before seizing solid as a crowbar. When the firefight ended, the ground was littered with spent brass and something worse. Jammed black rifles scattered beside the men who'd carried them. 23 Marines pinned down because their wonder weapon had stopped wondering and started killing Americans by design. Back home, Pentagon generals called it user error. Congressional committees called it communist propaganda. Defense contractors called it acceptable failure rates within normal parameters. But the soldiers knew their new rifle, the one that was supposed to be lighter, faster, cleaner. The weapon that would win the war through science and innovation was murdering them with mathematics they didn't understand and politics they couldn't control. The truth? It all began with one engineer. A man who thought war could be solved like an equation, who believed that aluminum and plastic could defeat wood and steel, who designed a rifle so revolutionary that the institution meant to use it spent 5 years trying to destroy it. Eugene Stoner's toy gun was lighter, faster, more accurate than anything ever fielded, on paper. But in the mud of Vietnam, his perfect math met imperfect reality, and reality always wins. This is how a failed idea became America's deadliest weapon, how bureaucracy almost lost a war, and how one rifle's catastrophic failure transformed into 50 years of battlefield dominance. The story begins not in a jungle, but in a California garage, where an ex-Marine with a slide rule was about to challenge everything the U.S. Army thought it knew about killing. 1954, Costa Mesa, California. Stoner's workshop didn't look like the birthplace of a revolution. It looked like an aircraft hangar that lost a fight with a machine shop. Aluminum shavings covered the concrete floor. Exotic alloys hung from ceiling racks. Plastic polymers, the kind used in aircraft cockpits, sat in bins beside forging hammers. And in the center, mounted on a test stand, sat something that made traditional gunsmiths physically recoil. A rifle that weighed less than 7 pounds, made from aircraft aluminum and fiberglass, with a carrying handle that doubled as a sight mount, and a gas system borrowed from Swedish naval cannons, the AR-15. Stoner's answer to a question nobody in the U.S. Army had asked. Stoner had left the Marines in 1945 with 2 things: a mechanical engineering degree and a stubborn conviction that the entire firearms industry was building weapons wrong. While companies like Winchester and Colt were perfecting 19th century wood and steel craftsmanship, Stoner was thinking like an aircraft designer. Why does a rifle need to weigh 10 pounds? He'd ask anyone who'd listen, and very few did. A soldier carries his weapon for hours, but shoots for minutes. Weight is the enemy. Complexity is the enemy. Everything that doesn't help you kill faster makes you die slower. The M1 Garand, America's rifle through World War II, weighed 9.5 pounds empty. The M14, adopted in 1957 as its modern replacement, weighed 11.2 pounds, loaded with a 20-round magazine. Both were magnificent pieces of machine steel and walnut. Both were designed for the wars of the past. Stoner's rifle weighed 6.4 pounds, loaded with a 20-round magazine. His direct impingement gas system eliminated the need for heavy operating rods. His modular design meant parts could be swapped in minutes without tools. His .22 .3 caliber round, developed with Winchester, was smaller than traditional military cartridges, but traveling at 3,200 feet per s, it tumbled through tissue with devastating terminal ballistics. On paper, the AR-15 represented a quantum leap in infantry firepower, a rifle that let soldiers carry more ammunition, move faster, and engage targets more accurately than any weapon system in history. But in 1954, The United States Army wanted nothing to do with it. The Pentagon, 1957, the Ordnance Board meeting. Stoner stood at the front of a wood-paneled conference room, his AR-15 disassembled on a table, facing an audience of colonels and generals whose collective expressions suggested they were watching someone propose using Tupperware for tank armor. "Gentlemen," Colonel Harold Yunt began, his Oklahoma draw thick with disdain, "this is a toy done. Real rifles are made of wood and steel. This looks like something my grandson would play with in the backyard." The room murmured agreement. Stoner tried to explain the engineering, the reduction in recoil allowing for controllable automatic fire, the weight savings enabling soldiers to carry 300 rounds instead of 80, the reliability advantages of fewer moving parts. The Army wasn't listening. They just adopted the M14, spending millions retooling factories, rewriting doctrine, retraining entire divisions. The M14 was a real rifle, a modernized M1 Garand with select fire capability and a detachable box magazine. It looked like a weapon. It felt substantial in your hands. It had walnut and machine steel, and the heft that 3 generations of American soldiers had learned meant quality. The fact that it was almost uncontrollable in full automatic fire didn't appear in official reports. The fact that it weighed more than the rifles it replaced wasn't discussed. The fact that its 7.3mm NATO cartridge produced recoil that made accurate follow-up shots nearly impossible was classified as user training issues. Bureaucratic inertia is a force more powerful than physics. The Army had invested too much in the M14 to admit it had chosen wrong, and Stoner's plastic rifle threatened the careers of every officer who championed the M14's adoption. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Stoner," General Williams said, his tone making it clear the meeting was over. "The United States Army will continue to rely on proven designs built to military standards, not experimental prototypes." Stoner packed his rifle back into his case. As he left, he passed Colonel Yunt in the hallway. "Son," Yunt said, not unkindly, "you're a hell of an engineer, but you don't understand how armies work. We don't need space-age ray guns. We need rifles that soldiers trust, and soldiers trust wood and steel." Stoner didn't argue. He'd learned that some people need to lose before they'll admit they were wrong. He just didn't know how many Americans would die learning that lesson. 1961. Fort Benning, Georgia, Special Warfare Center. President Kennedy had a problem. Guerrilla warfare in Southeast Asia was escalating. American advisors in Vietnam needed weapons for jungle combat, where engagements happened at 50 meters, not 500, where the enemy carried AK-47s that weighed 7 pounds and never jammed, where the M14's 11-pound bulk and uncontrollable full auto made it worse than useless. Air Force General Curtis LeMay had seen Stoner's rifle demonstrated at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He'd watched testers fire 1,000 rounds without cleaning, dump the rifle in sand and mud, and keep firing. He'd seen the wound ballistics, the way the high-velocity .223 round created massive, temporary cavities that incapacitated immediately. LeMay made a phone call. Within weeks, 1,000 AR-15s, now designated XM16E1, shipped to Vietnam for field testing with Special Forces units. The after-action reports were stunning. Enemy KIA rates increased by 300% when units transitioned from M14 to AR-15. Soldiers carrying AR-15s engaged more targets, carried more ammunition, and reported significantly higher confidence in firefights. One Special Forces captain wrote, "The AR-15 performs flawlessly in conditions that render the M14 inoperable. My men have begun requesting AR-15s instead of M14s. This is unprecedented in my 15 years of service." The rifle that traditional Army couldn't accept was proving itself in combat. But proving yourself and getting adopted are two different battles. Colt Firearms had purchased production rights from Stoner's original
30 NVA regulars, hitting the perimeter from 3 sides. AK fire so heavy it sounded like a chainsaw cutting through the wire. Donovan's M16 fired 4 rounds. Then the bolt locked forward. Spent casing stuck in the chamber. The extractor had ripped through the brass rim, leaving the case wedged in the barrel like a cork. He did what training taught him. Mortar tube. He slammed the forward assist. Nothing. He dropped the magazine, cleared the chamber, but the case wouldn't extract. The bolt wouldn't move. The rifle had become an 8-ounce club around him. The same scene repeated across the firebase. Marines slamming forward assists, pulling charging handles, beating their rifles against sandbags, trying to clear jams. Rifles that had been issued with a promise. The M16 is self-cleaning. You won't need to maintain it like the old M14. That promise was killing them. The Army Ordnance Corps, in its infinite wisdom, had made 2 changes to Stoner's design without telling anyone. Changes to save money. Changes that seemed minor on procurement spreadsheets. First, they'd eliminated the chrome-lined barrel. Chrome plating cost an extra $1.50 per rifle. Across 1 million rifles, that was $1.5 million in savings. The fact that chrome lining prevented corrosion and reduced friction was deemed non-essential by accountants who'd never humped a rifle through a monsoon. Second, they'd switched propellants. Stoner had specified IMR powder, a slower-burning propellant that reduced carbon buildup, but IMR was expensive and supplies were limited. So Ordnance switched to ball powder, a cheaper alternative that burned hotter and dirtier. The chamber pressures were technically within spec. The carbon fouling was 10 times worse. Nobody told the Marines. Nobody updated the technical manuals, and nobody issued cleaning kits because the rifle was self-cleaning. By June 1967, failure rates in some units reached 40%. 4 out of 10 rifles jamming in firefights. Marines writing letters home that read like horror stories. Mom, please send gun oil and cleaning rods. They told us we wouldn't need them. They lied. Jerry's M16 jammed yesterday, and he died trying to clear it. I'm carrying an AK now. It's a better rifle. That last line, American Marines preferring enemy weapons to their own issued rifles, landed on congressional desks like a grenade. The Pentagon, July 1967, damage control mode. Colonel Howard Yunt, the same officer who dismissed Stoner's rifle as a toy gun in 1957, now had explaining to do. Except his explanation blamed everyone except the people who'd made the decisions. Soldiers aren't maintaining their weapons properly, he told the Senate Armed Services Committee. The M16 performs flawlessly when used according to specifications. Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin wasn't buying it. Colonel, we have 127 letters from Marines in a corps. They describe rifles jamming after 20 rounds, extractors breaking, chambers corroding. Are you telling me 127 Marines all independently forgot how to clean a rifle? Sir, with respect, these reports are anecdotal. And Nelson held up a photograph. A Marine's M16. The chamber so corroded the bore looked like tree bark. This rifle was issued 8 weeks before this photo was taken. 8 weeks? How does that happen if the weapon is self-cleaning as your manuals claim? The hearing room went silent. The truth was spreading faster than the Pentagon could contain it. Field commanders were submitting reports that contradicted official Army positions. Journalists were interviewing survivors who described jammed rifles in explicit damning detail. And mothers were testifying to Congress about sons who died because their rifles stopped working. In California, Eugene Stoner read the congressional testimony with the particular horror of a man watching his life's work become synonymous with failure. He'd specified chrome-lined barrels. He'd required specific propellants. He designed a weapon system where every component worked in precise balance. And the Army had changed it to save money, to fit procurement preferences, to satisfy bureaucrats who viewed engineering specifications as suggestions. Stoner submitted a 47-page technical memo to the Defense Department outlining every deviation from his original design and their consequences. The memo was classified and buried. It would be 30 years before it was declassified. By then, the decisions made in 1963 cost an estimated 1,000 American lives, deaths attributed not to enemy action, but to procurement negligence. Firebase Charlie, Quezon, February 1968. Corporal James Harrison received his new M16A1 on a morning when the fog was so thick you could barely see 10 meters. The rifle looked identical to the old one. Same black furniture, same carrying handle, same 20-round magazine with improved feed geometry. Forward assist that actually worked, and for the first time, a cleaning kit with brushes, rods, and oil. The technical changes were minor. The psychological impact was profound. They fixed it, Harrison's squad leader said, his tone mixing relief with anger. They finally admitted it was broken and they fixed it. The difference was immediate and dramatic. Harrison's unit was hit by NVA regulars 3 days later. Same kind of ambush that had killed half his company 6 months earlier. Same terrain, same tactics, same enemy weapons, different outcome. His M16A1 fired 180 rounds in 90 seconds without a single malfunction, not one jam, not one failure to extract. The rifle that had betrayed Marines in 1967 was saving them in 1968. The after-action reports from early 1968 read like redemption arcs. Units that had reported 40% failure rates in 1967 were reporting 2% failure rates in 1968. Marines who had thrown away their M16s for captured AKs were requesting the new M16A1s. Previous weapon was unreliable in combat conditions, one commanding officer wrote. New variant performs flawlessly, morale improves significantly, Marines now trust their rifles. The technical improvements worked because they returned the rifle to Stoner's original specs. Chrome line reduced chamber corrosion to nearly zero. Proper propellant cut carbon buildup by 90%. Cleaning kits meant soldiers could maintain their weapons even in field conditions. But the redemption was bitter. The rifle now worked because the Army had finally admitted what Stoner knew since 1962. His original design was right. The changes made to save costs had cost lives. In 3 years, the M16 went from the most hated weapon in American service to the most requested. Not because it was new, but because it finally worked as designed. Soldiers who survived the early disasters wrote letters with a tone mixing vindication and fury. They could have done this in 1965 before Tommy died with a jammed rifle, before we learned to not trust the weapon in our hands. They knew how to fix it, they just didn't want to spend the money. By mid-1968, the M16A1 had proven itself in the worst combat conditions imaginable. Monsoon rains, mud, heat, humidity. The rifle that the Army had broken then fixed was dominating the jungle. But the transformation wasn't complete. The M16A1 worked, but Stoner's vision was bigger than a reliable rifle. He designed a weapons system, a philosophy of infantry combat built on mobility, firepower, and precision. And in 1969, during the Tet Offensive, American forces were about to discover what happened when all three came together. Hue City, February 1968, Tet Offensive. The battle for Hue was urban warfare at its most brutal. House to house, room to room, ranges so close you could see the fear in the enemy's eyes before you fired. This was where the M16A1 became legendary. Sergeant Robert Chen's platoon was clearing a 3-story building when they encountered NVA regulars dug into the second floor. The corridor was 8 feet wide. The engagement range was less than 20 meters. Chen's Mark IV A1 fired on semi-automatic, precise double taps that dropped targets before they could return fire. Light enough to maneuver through doorways, fast enough to engage multiple targets in seconds, reliable enough that he never once doubted whether the trigger pull would result in a shot. The rifle is fast, Chen would later write in his combat journal. Faster than thinking. You see the threat, the rifle's already on target, already firing. No heavy barrel pulling your aim off. No massive recoil throwing your second shot high. Just pure, efficient violence. The Viet Cong had learned to fear the sound of the M16. The high-pitched crack of the 5.56 round was distinctive, different from the deeper bark of the AK-47. And when they heard it, they knew they were facing Americans who could put 3 rounds into a man-sized target at 300 meters in under 2 seconds. Captured NVA documents from 1969 revealed their tactical response. Engage M16-equipped units only when numerical superiority is ensured. The black rifle gives American soldiers significant advantage in aimed fire and ammunition capacity.
The black rifle. That's what they called it. Not with respect, but with the careful recognition predators give to dangerous prey. By 1969, the M16A1 had become the standard weapon for U.S. forces in Vietnam. Over 600,000 rifles deployed, failure rates below 2%. Soldiers who'd cursed the weapon 2 years earlier now refused to carry anything else. Eugene Stoner visited Vietnam in late 1969, his first trip to see his rifle in actual combat. He met with Marines at Firebase Holcomb, expecting to defend his design against lingering complaints. Instead, a lance corporal approached him after a briefing. "Sir, are you the guy who designed this?" The Marine held up his M16A1. The finish worn, the stock scuffed, but the weapon clean and clearly cared for. "I am," Stoner said. "And thank you, sir. This rifle saved my life 3 times. I wouldn't carry anything else." Stoner didn't know what to say. For 5 years, his rifle had been synonymous with failure, with betrayal, with American blood spilled because bureaucrats had broken his design to save money. But that Lance Corporal didn't know that history. He only knew the rifle in his hands worked when it mattered most. That night, Stoner wrote in his journal, "The rifle has been redeemed. Not because I proved anyone wrong, but because the Marines proved it right. In the worst conditions imaginable, against an enemy that never stops, my rifle keeps them alive. That's all I ever wanted." Fort Benning, Georgia, 1975. The Vietnam War was over. American forces were coming home and the M16A1 was coming with them. But the rifle's story wasn't ending. It was evolving. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the M16 became the template for modern assault rifles. The modular design Stoner pioneered meant the rifle could adapt to new requirements without redesigning from scratch. Need a shorter barrel for paratroopers? Swap the barrel assembly. Want a heavier bullet for long-range work? Change the rifling twist rate. Need mounting points for optics and accessories? Add rails to the handguard. The M16A2, adopted in 1982, incorporated lessons from Vietnam and the Cold War. A heavier barrel for sustained fire. A 3-round burst instead of full automatic to improve ammunition conservation. Better sights for longer range engagement. Better furniture that resisted cracking in Arctic conditions. But Stoner's basic geometry remained unchanged. The buffer tube, the direct impingement system, the 5.56 meter chambering, these were constants, proof that his original design had been right. In 1994, the U.S. military adopted the M4 carbine, a shortened version of the M16 for close quarters combat. Same system, same operating principles, just packaged for modern warfare, where soldiers kicked in doors in Fallujah, cleared caves in Tora Bora, and engaged Taliban fighters in Afghan. The M4 weighed 6.4 pounds loaded, exactly the same weight as Stoner's original AR-15 in 1956. The rifle had come full circle. The toy gun that Kermels had mocked in 1957 had become the longest-serving rifle in American military history. Eugene Stoner died on April 24, 1997, at age 74. His obituary in the New York Times was 3 paragraphs, no front page, no lengthy tribute, just to note that an engineer had passed away. He'd never become wealthy from his design. He'd sold the rights to Colt for a fraction of what they were worth. He'd spent the last decades of his life consulting on rifle designs, living comfortably, but not extravagantly, watching his rifle evolve into something bigger than he'd imagined. By the time of his death, over 8 million M16s and variants had been produced. The rifle had served in every American conflict since 1965. Special Forces, Infantry, Marines, Air Force Security, and even Navy SEALs carried versions of Stoner's design. But most Americans couldn't have told you who Eugene Stoner was. The rifle he designed became an American cultural icon. Controversial, politically charged, instantly recognizable, it appeared in movies, video games, news broadcasts from war zones. It became a symbol of American military power for better or worse. Stoner never wanted that. He'd wanted to build a better tool to solve an engineering problem, to give soldiers a weapon that increased their chance of survival through superior design, not political symbolism. In his later years, he gave interviews where he reflected on his creation with the complicated pride of a parent whose child became famous for the wrong reasons. "I designed a rifle," he said. "The politics, the arguments about gun rights, the cultural wars, that's not what I built. I built a tool for soldiers. Whether civilians should have them, whether they're too dangerous, that's for society to decide. I just made a rifle that worked."
But the rifle's success was undeniable. By 2010, over 90% of U.S. military small arms were based on Stoner's AR-15 platform. The design had outlasted every competing system, had proven more adaptable, more reliable, and more effective than anything that came before or after. The toy gun had won, not through politics or procurement games, but through 50 years of combat, proving that Stoner's original vision was right. Lighter is better, modularity is strength, and a rifle should serve the soldier, not the institution. In his aluminum bones lies a truth about American innovation, that breakthrough ideas always look stupid until they work, that bureaucracy will always resist change until reality forces adaptation, that the distance between impossible and standard is measured in blood, time, and stubborn engineers who refuse to compromise. The M16 began as a dream in a California workshop, failed as a weapon in Vietnamese jungles, and endured as a legend across 5 decades of war. Eugene Stoner didn't live to see the M4 in Iraq, didn't see his rifle carried by soldiers fighting in deserts and mountains he never imagined, didn't see the ultimate vindication of his design philosophy. But every time a soldier picks up an M4, they're holding Eugene Stoner's answer to a question the Army tried to ignore. What if lighter, faster, and simpler actually won wars? The institution took 50 years to admit he was right, but in the end, they all carried his rifle. Fade to archival footage. Marines in Vietnam, 1968, cleaning M16A1s in the rain. Soldiers in Fallujah, 2004, clearing rooms with M4s. Army Rangers in Afghanistan, 2021, engaging Taliban fighters at long range with precision rifles built on Stoner's platform. Different wars, different enemies, same rifle geometry. History rarely forgives its engineers, but it remembers their designs. Eugene Stoner didn't invent the assault rifle. He didn't create the concept of modular firearms. He didn't pioneer lightweight materials and weapon systems, but he understood something deeper than innovation. He understood that the best design isn't the one with the most features, it's the one that works when everything else fails. That survives not just combat, but bureaucracy. That adapts not just to new enemies, but to new wars entirely. The M16 began as a failed weapon because institutions tried to make it something it wasn't. When they finally let it be what Eugene Stoner designed, it became the most successful military rifle in history. 57 years of service, counting. The engineer who built it never got rich, never got famous, never saw his name on the rifle that bears his design DNA in every dimension. But 8 million rifles later, his geometry endures in the weight distribution that makes the M4 pointable in milliseconds, in the direct impingement system that eliminates heavy operating rods, in the modular construction that lets a rifle transform from close-quarters carbine to designated marksman rifle with a barrel swap and an optic change. Eugene Stoner didn't invent a rifle, he invented a philosophy that the future belongs to those who refuse to build yesterday's machines, that innovation requires courage to look stupid until you're proven right, that the distance between toy gun and longest-serving rifle in American military history is measured not in years, but in the willingness to trust numbers over tradition. The M16 began as a dream, failed as a weapon, and endured as proof that sometimes the engineer was right and everyone else was wrong.